Hello friends, you're the Lonesome Gamer, and today I'm gonna play Pax Romana by Richard Burke. It's a game for up to 4 players, and it covers the time from 300 BC to 50 BC in the Mediterranean world. It is the predecessor of Genesis, Kingdoms and Empires, or Empires and Kingdoms in the late Bronze Age. We've seen that a few months ago, I don't know, maybe a year ago or so. And, well, let's take a closer look at that. I'm going to set up the game. Okay, so the game is set, and yeah, it's fairly heavy. We have here a rulebook of about 50 pages, and it's interesting that Genesis only has pretty much about half the number. But there's a lot of more details in there. We have the actually infamous navigational rules of the game, naval rules of the game, and yeah, lots of special rules for the different independence and I don't know, all kinds of stuff. Well, we're gonna go with the ultra-historical scenario. So we have 4 main factions. We have Rome, pretty small at the beginning. They control Italia and Cisalpina, and that's basically it. They don't even control their home territory because Bruttium is under control of the Greeks. Then we have Carthage. They control their home territory down here, Carthage. And then they have an outpost in Spain, Baetica. In addition, they control most of the Sicilies, West Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. Greece controls his home territory, as we said here, Bruttium. In addition, they have also here in Asia Minor some outposts. They control Ionia, they control Galatia. They have some remnants of the fleet from the successor wars, sitting here in Cyprus and in Zidon. They have a garrison left in Tyre. And they also have 2 outposts here, one in Emporiae and one in Marsilia. The problem with these units is these are basically all non-combat units, and yeah, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense to try to hold on to these outposts here in Syria, Spain and France and Gaul. We might consider evacuating them. Not sure what to do with them. Maybe we simply let them die. And finally we have the East here, and normally the East would have the whole red territory here as its home territory, but in this special scenario, there is here the border to Egypt, which is controlled by the Ptolemies. They act as an independent faction, and the East only controls Syria and Judea. But they have here a massive army that they can bring into play the moment they activate the first time. And yeah, that's a very powerful army. We're going to see what they're going to do with that. In addition, we have a few minors. We have here the kingdom of Pergamon, which is neutral. Rhodes is also neutral. You can pass through that, but you have to pay if you want to do that. We have here Syracuse, and that one here, the Mammarians, I think that's what they're called. Furthermore, we have tribes all scattered in these uncontrolled areas in Spain, here in Gaul, Britannia, Germania, and here also the Danube region. We don't know how strong they are. They are kind of placed randomly here on these specific tribal places. So if a unit enters such a space, we flip it, we find a number, and then place the number of tribal soldiers in that space. Finally, we have here a soldier of fortune army that represents the army of Pyrrhus. It is under control of the Greek player, and it only remains for the first turn. Not the first activation, but the whole first turn. But they are restricted. They can only move to the west, basically. They're not allowed to remain in Greece. They can enter Rome, the Danube, Germania, or Gaul. I'm not even sure if they can enter. No, let me see. Nah. The territories of Rome, whatever that means. Well, okay. And the Sicilies, okay. Fine, so the goal of the game is to gain victory points. We have here a victory point track, and if a player at the end of the turn has up to 80 victory points, and they are cumulative, so they add from turn to turn. And if at any point we have 80 victory points, the game ends, and then the player with the highest number of victory points wins, in case two or more players achieve 80 or more in the same turn. Otherwise, the game goes up to turn 10, and then the player with the highest number of victory points wins. Now each turn represents 25 years. So overall, it's a time period for over 250 years, from 300 to 50 BC. So how do you gain victory points? There are two options. First, you gain control for well, let's say geographical, I don't know, geographical OP. I don't know what that actually means. But for basically for territories and provinces that you control. A province, well, the territories are the big areas here with these different colors, for example, Hispania or Rome, the Danube, Greece. These are the different territories. The provinces are the smaller regions that the territories are divided into. Now, at the end of each turn, we count our geographic points, and each province you control gives you 1 point. If you control a territory, you get an additional point, except if it's your home territory. Then you only gain points for the provinces in the home territory. Control means that you control a space if you have a combat. If you have a unit in that space, except for a fleet, these guys, they don't give you control. But if you have a garrison unit or a combat unit in a space, you control that space. In addition, if you have a city or a town in a space, you also control it. Furthermore, if it's in your home area, you don't need anything in the space. You control it as long as it's not controlled by someone else. So these spaces here, for example, are all controlled by the Roman player as long as there is no enemy unit or enemy city in there, like that is the case in these with these spaces down here. Okay, you control a province if you control more than half of the non-transit spaces. So you can see we have here the transit spaces, these are the standard spaces. If you control more than half of the standard spaces, you control the province. You also control the province if you control only one space and there is no other guy that controls a space in that province. So for example, if I would simply place one Roman unit here in Sirmium, I would control the whole province. But tribes, an example, they prevent me from controlling a province in that way. In addition, it's a little more complex with home territories. If each home territory has a province with a capital, right? The Greeks even have 2 capitals. Now, with a province without a capital, it works just the normal way, as I've explained. But if there's a capital in the province, as long as the owner of the province, the guy with the home, who usually is at home there, as long as he owns the capital, he also controls the province, no matter how many other spaces are taken by enemies. If another player wants to control the home province with a capital of another player, then he needs to control the capital and at least half the spaces in that province, or actually more than half of the spaces in that province. Okay, so I guess basically it's clear. For the most part, you need more than half the spaces. If there's nobody else in a province, one space is enough. And then we have the exception with the home territories. Okay, now we count all these points. And by the way, you control a territory if you control all the provinces. I don't know if I mentioned that. So we count all the points then for the provinces and the territories we control, and then the player who has the most of these GOP, I don't know, geographical whatever points, he then gets, if I remember that right, he then gets 7 points. Just let me see. Oh gosh. Variance, victory, there we go. Yeah, 7 victory points. The guy who controls the second most gets 4 victory points. The third most guy 2 victory points. And the last one, he doesn't get any victory points. Okay, so the number of points you gain is not equal to the number of points of these geographical points that you have. So the most points you can get for territories is actually 7. Another option to gain victory points is due to civilization points. Now, you get civilization points for your cities and towns. This is a city, and we also have smaller ones, for example, simply here on the back side, that would be a town. Now, again, same thing, we count how many civilization points we have. Each city is worth 3 civilization points. Each town is worth 1 civilization point. If a city is damaged, it's worth 1 civilization point. If a town is damaged, it's worth nothing. Then the player with the most civilization points gets 5 victory points. The player with the second most civilization points 3. The third one 1 point. And the last guy gains nothing. Yeah, okay. And then there are some special rules for ties, but we don't want to go too much into detail here. Finally, there is one more option to gain victory points. We have in here, well, kind of political goals, political missions, we could say. And we can buy these during the manpower phase. Let me see, and we have here a chart somewhere. There we go. These are the opportunity objectives. And there are all kinds of things. We simply randomly draw one of them, and well, you can see here some examples: control Asia Minor, control Egypt, control Hispania, or be the richest player in the game, control one home province of any other player, and so on. And this then also gives you additional victory points as long as you manage to fulfill these requirements at the end of a turn. So overall, if you really are completely dominating, you could get 7 victory points for the territories, you could get 5 victory points for your cities. So the maximum basically would be 12 in that way. And then, in theory, you could have a few more, let's say maybe 15 if you're doing fantastic. So to get 80 points is not easy. You would probably need, yeah, I don't know, I mean, let's say you can do 30 in 2 rounds. I think you will probably at least 6 turns, probably more, to get 80 points here. But we'll see. Okay, now up here we have now a sequence of play. Usually we would start with the income phase, but we ignore this on turn 1. The maintenance phase we also ignore on turn 1. Removal phase, same thing, blah, blah, blah. So we start basically in the activation phase, phase F. Okay. Now at the beginning, for the first 4 activations, we have here a play order, and this order comes from the setup in the scenario book. And it goes from right to left, which is a little bit tricky, but we have here number 1, number 2. I find that a little confusing. I would go from left to right, but whatever. So the Greek player can activate first with that marker. And what he can do now is he has 2 options. He could either use this activation to recruit units, or he could use it to do military actions, meaning he would have one major move. It's basically the same as in Genesis. One major move, that means he could move a stack of units, and then he has 2 minor moves, which means he can move 2 individual units. Now he cannot move units twice during a single activation phase. Instead of the minor moves, he could also build towns or cities. Okay? And now the green player actually controls, the blue player controls the soldier of fortune, Pyrrhus. So yeah, he might now consider moving that massive army as long as he can, because it goes away after the first turn. And in each turn, each player has usually 4 activations. So that means he can move these guys 4 times, and he probably might want to do that. Okay, now in addition, I've again made some kind of personality values for the different players. The Roman player ended up as a pretty rational guy, but the others are definitely not. Carthage and Greece are both very, very aggressive players. And the Eastern player is a very passive guy. And in addition, I'm going to allow table talk in the game. There is an optional rule that allows that. Otherwise, it is you can only kind of bribe people to ask them to do specific actions, as it was possible in Genesis 2. But here we have an optional rule that allows table talk, and I will definitely do that. And that brings us to the point where the Eastern player says, okay, you know, I'm not going to do you any harm here. I just want to grab here a few provinces in Asia Minor and then maybe move north here to the Chersonese or whatever. And then maybe somehow on the long run try to prepare for an attack against the Ptolemies. The Greek player is basically fine with that because he wants to use his soldier of fortune army, and if he wants to do that in an aggressive way, he obviously wants to fight Rome, because that would then also protect his colonies here in Italy, and then he can march against Rome. And then again, it only makes sense that the Carthaginian player kind of comes to an agreement with the Greek player, and they say, okay, we see Rome as our common enemy, and we try to hit them hard right in the beginning. So that's bad news for the Roman player here. And it is, I think it might be very well possible that Rome will suffer a lot right from the beginning here. Okay, now we start with the Greek player. The Greek player has to pay a talent if he wants to use his activation marker. So, by the way, you can also use these numbers here to keep track of your talents, but I don't want to do that. I kind of like the coins. Okay, now we draw a... Well, that's actually not true. The Greek player actually has already played the Soldier of Fortune card in this specific scenario. That was the card that brought Pyrrhus into the game. So considering that he already played that, I'm not even sure if he should pay one more talent. Probably not, so I'm going to give him that talent back. And now we're allowed to move these guys. Now, as you can see, the leader here has on the left a number and another one on the right. Now the left number is the tactical rating, which is important for battle and other maneuvers like interception. And then we have on the right the campaign rating, which is important for the movement. And now we simply roll a die and add the campaign rating, and that's only a 1. So that gives us then 5 movement points, which is not too impressive. Okay, now let's see where we want to go. I'm kind of tempted to land here in Brundisium and then move right away to Capua. Actually, that is a bit confusing. There's Rome and city written, but obviously this is not the city of Rome, it's just the city of the Roman player. So now, here's the thing, the naval rules in this game are quite tricky. In fact, they are, in my opinion, much more complex than the land movement rules. And that's the strange things. I mean, the naval rules are probably not that tricky as in some other really heavy war games, I don't know, like World at War or something. But compared to the very, very simple land movement rules, the naval rules are ridiculous. So, if we want to do naval actions, there are basically two ways. We could move these fleets, and if they move, they can move as far as they want. They don't need any movement points. I mean, there are specific rules when they have to stop and then roll if they can move on and so on, but they don't use movement points. That's what I wanted to say. They cannot move as far as they want, but they don't use movement points. Then you can do naval transport. That means you simply can take a unit of any kind and take the sea path here and move them across these naval lines. And that costs you a movement point from space to space. You can also combine these two, which gives them a better protection against enemy units and also against naval disasters. And if you do that, you also follow these naval transport rules, and then the fleets can no longer move without movement points. And that's what I'm going to do in this case here. So there is a fleet combined with these units. And by the way, usually the Soldier of Fortunes cannot combine with my units during movement. The only exception is I can add one fleet or one galley squadron to them. There is no specific Soldier of Fortune galley squadron here. So that would be allowed. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to move them, and to do that I have to first embark, which will cost me one movement point. Then I start moving, and so with my first movement point, I'm going to move onto that naval transit point here. And these are different to these deep sea transit points, okay? Now on a naval transit point, I now have to roll, if I'm allowed, to continue my move, I think. Let me see. Wait a minute. So this is a regular naval transit point. So yeah, I simply have to roll now, and on a 1 to 5 there is no effect. So I'm fine. Okay. And actually I wonder. Yeah. Okay. So that was my second movement point. Then I'm going to move here to Brundisium with my third, or with my, wait a minute, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, exactly. With my fourth movement point, I'm going to debark. So that means I now have 1 point left. And I could also continue moving here to Barium and then debark there. Maybe that's even a better idea. Yeah, I think I want to do that. So I'm going to move right there. And then debark, and that's it then. Yeah, I think that's what I want to do. So luckily for the Romans, I cannot move any further here, because I only rolled that 1 for movement. And now I have 2 minor moves left. Now what I could do is, I could either move single units, or I could build cities. Now actually I think I want to move single units, because I want to bring these, I want to retreat with these units. Otherwise, if they are in a non-friendly port, and remember, a galley squadron doesn't give me control over a port, so these would be non-friendly ports. If galley squadrons are in a non-friendly port at the end of the turn, during the attrition phase, then they would be destroyed. Therefore, it's pretty important for me to bring these guys home. Now, as I already said, they don't use any movement points, but I have to check how far they can move, because anytime I enter a non-friendly port, I have to roll if I'm allowed to continue. So, for example, now I enter here, and there I have to stop now. And then I have to roll a die, and only if I roll a... Yeah, that's great. Okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense. If I roll less or equal than a 7, I can move on. If I roll... What? Yeah, actually... No, it's fine. If I roll higher or equal than an 8, I have to stop moving. Yeah, okay, that works out. Yeah, so let's see what I roll here. Okay, I cannot move any further, so I have to stop my movement here in Seleucia. And now I can try to move these guys. I think I don't care about my garrison here. So I'm going to move these guys to Salamis. Again, a non-friendly port, so I have to stop and check if I may continue. And this time I can. Now I'm going to move here to Seleucia. And actually, I want to stop because then in the next turn, I can move these 2 galley squadrons together as one fleet. But then I couldn't do it as a minor move anymore. So yeah, I actually want to move on here. And I'm not allowed to do that because I rolled an 8. So therefore, we sit now both here. Okay, and that is then the end of the Greek activation phase. Okay, so now we are allowed, with the East player who goes next, we can now bring this army here into play. First we got to pay to do that, to use the activation marker. In addition, that gives us 10 points. That's 10 talents. That's a simple special rule. The moment we activate the first activation marker and bring that army into play, we can use 10 talents. We gain also 10 talents. So now we have here a lot of units, for example 5 infantry with a combat value of 15, which is very, very powerful. And okay, let's see. I mean, as I said, the Eastern player has a very passive nature. So I want to find the placeholder for the army here. Damn it. That would be army. There we are. This is number B. And there is army A. Okay. So we can place now the army here at Aleppo. No, that's not true. At Edessa. We could choose between Palmyra, Edessa, and Damascus. That's what the scenario rules say. We place them with the leader here, a 2-6 leader, and then, which is, he represents Seleucus, by the way. And now we can move and try to grab some part here of Asia Minor, I guess. But first we have to draw a card. I nearly forgot that. And that says disease. Only the good die young. Play when drawn. Roll 1d6 comparing the result to the campaign rating of your highest rated leader in the game. If the result is lower than that rating, the leader has died. Remove him and place him in your leader pool. Oh shit. Okay, that is very bad. Because he has a campaign rating of 6. Wow, that sucks. So if we roll a 1 to 5, the leader died. And yeah, that's the case. Wow, what a start. Shit. Okay, that's a problem because then it's a leaderless army. And he is actually removed from... Wait a minute, remove him and place him in your leader pool. Okay, at least he's not removed from the game, which would be extremely painful then. So, okay. No, that's, wait a second, is that? Yeah, that's definitely the case here. Wow. Okay, what a start. Now that means that army is at the moment leaderless, and therefore they could not add anything to their movement roll. But I could, for example, activate that guy and then build a big army with them and then let him do the work. And that's what I want to do, obviously. Okay, now let's see. Okay, only a 1 again, so also only 5 points, which is very, very disappointing. So I think I want to leave... Maybe I want to leave these guys here to defend my capital in Antioch. Now, if I move the leader alone, I could actually move him up to the double number of spaces, up to 8 spaces. But because I want to pick up that army, I only have 5 movement points, so that means 1, 2. Picking up an army or a unit adds 1, so that's 3. And then we have 4. I cannot end my movement in the transit space, I'm not allowed. So, well, it seems I would end up, in Samosata. Okay. Then we have single movement points or 2 minor moves. I want to move one of these light infantry units. I could move them up to 6 spaces. So I guess I want to bring that guy here to Lycia. So 1, 2. There's no problem with these galley squadrons. They don't affect each other. 3. So I enter here Zide and thereby gain control of the province of Lycia. Now, if I gain control of a province, that gives me 1 stability point. And I will explain later why that is important. And by the way, if you wonder why the money is sitting here, in this scenario, the income of Syria is 2 instead of 1, because the East player is already quite penalized because of this splitting of his territory here. He doesn't gain the rich Egyptian income, so he gets a little more from Syria instead. In addition, what I want to do during my second minor move, I want to create garrison units. I can do that by breaking down combat units into garrison units. I can break down a light infantry into 2 garrison units, and I think a heavy infantry into 3 garrison units. So I'm going to take the light infantry from Damascus and then gain two garrison units for that. The reason why I do that is because I want to build towns and maybe later cities. And to do that, you need a garrison unit first. Okay. So that is then the end of the activation of the East player. So the Carthaginian player also pays 1 talent to use his activation marker. Then he draws a card. And that's a rebellion. A rebellion has occurred. You always have to draw a card, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. First you pay a talent, then you draw a card, then you can take your actions. A rebellion has occurred. To determine where and what kind, roll 2d6 on the rebellion table, then consult the rebellion rules for the effect. Okay, let's see. We have over there, we have the rebellion table. Now that is a 6, Danube. Okay, let's see what that means. I think at the moment it's not going to be too interesting because nobody has any units there. Okay. These are rebellions, okay. Danube, all player land units to a maximum of 8 BP in any one space in one of the provinces of the territory of the Danube are eliminated. If there are no units, treat it as no event. Okay, that's it. So, nothing happened here. Now the player will do a recruitment action instead of a military action. They have 12 bucks here. They will need at least 3. They will need at least 3 to be allowed to use all their activation markers. Now let's see. I can only recruit units or unit types from provinces that I control. But here in Carthage, I can actually recruit heavy infantry, light infantry, cav, and elephants. That's basically everything that is possible. Here in Hispania, in this area, Baetica, I can only control light infantry and cavalry. In addition, we have the Sicilies here, which allow us to recruit light infantry. Okay. Okay, now I've raised 2 light infantries. No, that's not true. I've raised 2 heavy infantries and 1 light infantries. And I've placed one here in Malacca, and the others I placed here with this army in Lilybaeum. I can basically place a unit that I've raised on any space that I control, as long as there is line of communications to my home country. That's not the case. I can only place units that I could raise in the specific province in that province. For example, if there would be no line of communications to Baetica, I could only hire light infantry and cavalry there, and no elephants and no heavy infantry. Okay, so that is the end of the turn of the Carthaginian player. Because if you did recruitment, you can do no major nor any minor moves. So the Roman player, he also pays a buck. He starts actually with the most money, and he's got to do a stability check. You may play this card against any player with a stability level of 3 or lower. If you are the only player with a stability level of 3 or lower, you must play this card on yourself. Okay, play when drawn. So that means he has to play it against the Greek player. And let's see, 17.2. Okay. There we are. These are the cards here. Stability check. Okay. Dip, 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 dip. So let's see. So the guy is stable. The affected player must pay 2 talents for bread and circuses to keep the locals amused. If he does not have the 2 talents or refuses to pay, lower his stability by 1 for each talent he refuses or cannot pay. Okay, so he's going to pay these 2 talents, and then Greece is fine. And there you can now see how, for example, a lower stability can affect the game. The worse the situation is, the more problems you have due to some of these event cards, for example. Now the Roman player, he already sees now that these guys are showing up here, so he might actually consider to hire also more units. Let's see how much he has here. These are legions. Well, they're not so bad actually. He's got a lot of legions here. So the Roman player actually hired 5 legions here in Capua for 10 bucks. And these guys are very powerful. They are stronger than the heavy infantry. At that point, Rome cannot hire cavalry, at least not in their home area. Only legions are available there. From turn 3 on, a special role will take effect. That means that then cavalry is kind of included in the legions, but at that time this is not the case yet. Anyway, it's going to be very hard now for Pyrrhus to take Capua if he really wants to try that at all. Okay, now that is the end then of the Roman activation, and that means we've seen now the first 4 activation markers. From now on we're going to draw from the cup, but I think this is actually a good time to stop it and to load this up. At that point we haven't seen too much action going on, basically nothing. But again, I mean, Rome is in this very difficult situation, under attack from 2 sides. Maybe he can convince the Eastern player to kind of help him out a little bit and maybe distract the Greeks. Because, yeah, of course, on the long term, if these 2 gang up against Rome, he would not stand a chance against them. But then there is again a good chance, once Rome is out of the game, that they turn against the East. Therefore, it might be a good idea, it might be in the interest of the Eastern player to keep Rome in the game, at least. But because he is such a passive guy and also very true to his alliances, it's not going to be easy to convince him to do that. So, yeah, hope to see you in the next video or on lonesomegamer.com. Bye.